All right, folks, we're getting about ready to start. I can see people filtering into the room already. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got, the room's filling up quick. We've got a couple of Johns. We've got Elisa, Steve, Camilo, Ali, Mark, Michael, Steve. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. This is Brittany, by the way. If you've been to any of our webinars before, Brittany is our first ever webinar guest. So I'm absolutely delighted to start off with Brittany.
Honored.
So I'm definitely, I think I see some familiar names in here. Yeah, Doris, you've definitely been in our previous webinars. We've got Jackie, James, John. I should tell you, for the participants that are here already, this has been our most popular ever webinar in terms of registrations. Brittany is going to talk to us about a minimalist approach to content marketing. And I know, like, this is something that I think is incredibly important. It's something that spoke to me immediately as soon as I heard the concept of it. And the fact that so many people have registered for this webinar, like, I know it's something that we're all in need of. So it's great to have Brittany here to sort of take us through it.
Yeah, I was telling you before we recorded that for a lot of my career, I kind of felt like I burnt out really quickly, and like I didn't have as much endurance as other marketers. And now that we're in this kind of burnout era, I realized the one good thing about that is now that it's happening to other people, I've already figured out a solution.
Yeah, perfect. A weakness becomes a strength, isn't that what they say?
Exactly, turning the lemons into lemonade.
Yes, I love it.
And I don't know if you can like tell the details, but I have Beyonce behind me, so I like turning lemons into lemonade.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, the other thing I should say as well is that Brittany's webinars aren't your typical webinars. They're always a bit more fun. Plenty of pop culture references in there. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a fun one. So yeah, I'm excited actually to get started. We're at about that time. It's nearly time to start. I'm just going to give people a few more minutes to filter in. I know that we have a ton of people waiting to get in, so I'm just going to get a couple of minutes before we get into it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look closely and try to figure out the details of the decor, you can kind of guess what examples are coming up in the webinar. We've got The Good Place over here. We've got Beyonce. We've got Friends. We've got Parks and Rec, 30 Rock.
Yes.
And I think a lot of those are going to pop up in the webinar later.
Love it. Big Parks and Rec fan here. So yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Happy days. So let me see. I want to be mindful of everyone else's time. So everyone that is here already, that has been here to start on time, we're not going to keep you waiting anymore. Just in terms of a bit of quick housekeeping, the webinar is going to last about an hour. That includes Q&A. So I'm going to pass over to Brittany in a minute. She's going to take us through the minimalist approach to content marketing. Feel free to ask any questions throughout the workshop. Just use the chat panel down the side of the screen. I'll be busy taking notes and seeing what questions come in. And then once Brittany's finished, we're going to have a special Q&A sort of section. So don't worry if Brittany doesn't answer your question at the time, we will circle back and answer it at the end. Also, this webinar is being recorded. So if you can't stick around for the full thing, don't worry. I'll be sending out a link with a link to the replay tomorrow. So that's pretty much it. Without further ado, I'm going to turn off my camera, turn off my mic, and pass over to Brittany.
Awesome. I will get my screen share going so you can see my slides. And let's present. All right. You should be able to see my screen right now. And yeah, thanks for the intro. As you mentioned, we're going to be talking about how we can build a more minimalist content strategy. And if that sounds like an odd concept, let me convince you in a little second. So let me know in the chat, like I won't be able to see it, but we can talk about it later. If you have ever burned out in your marketing career or gotten close to burnout and realized you needed to make drastic changes or whatever. Let me know if you've ever had that happen, if you've ever burnt out. If you ever feel like you're on a never-ending content treadmill where you're publishing X times a week, every week, forever and ever and ever, and you don't know when it ends. Has that ever happened? And are you tired of running on that content treadmill? Because I don't know about you, but I don't have a lot of endurance. The marathons I like are of the Netflix variety. And when I run, I'd prefer it to be outdoors. So content treadmills, not my thing. And like I said, I feel like I kind of got to the burnout point with this a little bit quicker than everyone else, but I know that it happens to a lot of other people too. And that is because we are still running our content marketing by this outdated approach that was developed kind of still at the beginning of when content marketing was becoming a popular thing. And it was pre-content shock. And if you've never heard the phrase content shock, it's from a blog post by Mark Schaefer a while ago now, where he predicted that this content overload would happen and it would hurt marketers and our audiences alike. And that's exactly where we are now. And this is how it's hurting marketers. It's burning us out. And this old way of content marketing focuses all on things like publishing as much content as possible. We're all trying to get to the point where like we're doing daily blog posts. That's kind of like the ultimate goal, you know? Where we're focusing so much on just pushing out individual pieces of content and looking at each blog post or each video with tunnel vision and forgetting to look at the bigger picture. We are constantly starting over and recreating the wheel because of that tunnel vision. And we're always focused on the next blog post and forgetting about this big body of work we've already created. And marketers and content creators, because of all of this, we're burning out because this is not the way that our careers, it's not sustainable. And so when we keep doing this for years on end, we burn out. And I call this approach more cowbell content marketing, because if you remember this wonderful SNL sketch with Christopher Walken, I got a prescription and I got a fever and the only prescription is more cowbell. That's exactly how we're treating content, where we've kind of turned slap some content on it into this Band-Aid. Where more content is the prescription for everything, when in reality that's not true. And another word that I like to call it is maximalist content marketing. And as you can see from this silly headshot on the screen, as you can see from my patterned clothing and busy decor, my personality may be maximalist, but my marketing is not anymore at least. So a little bit more about me. Again, you can see personality, loud. Excuse me. I am a freelance writer, consultant, and coach, working mostly for SaaS companies. And before going out on my own, I was the head of content for a SaaS company for 5 years. So I've been where, you know, all of the marketers I work with are. And like I said, it burnt out. That's why I started my own thing. And I'm also a serial side hustler based all content-based side hustles like writing ebooks or starting monetized blogs and things like that. So this is all the stuff that I'm talking about. It's been something that I've not just used, you know, in my career, but it's really just how I have approached business in general now. I'm a chronic illness warrior, which is why it is so crucial to me that I found a way of marketing that required less energy and less burnout. And so I like to say that I'm equally ambitious and lazy, because I've got huge goals for anyone that I handle marketing for. I've got huge goals for myself, but because of my limited energy, I'm not going to do more work than required to do so, which is what this whole more cowbell content approach is doing. And then you've figured this out already, but pop culture references are my love language. And so let's talk about the effects of maximalist content marketing and reasons why more content is not better. First of all, old content starts to get stale when you ignore it. If you're just pushing out a new blog post week after week for years and you never take time to pause on pressing publish and update what you've created in the past, that all starts to get stale. The advice gets outdated, links break, rankings and target keyword stuff changes. So just the old content starts to get stale. You can start to get stuck on new content ideas because eventually you get to a point where, you know, let's say you're publishing content twice a week for a year, that's over 100 blog posts. And how many new pieces of content do you really need to address all of the questions that your potential customers may have? So eventually you get to a point where you can't come up with new ideas without wading into more irrelevant and less, you know, lead generation friendly waters. And then because you don't want to wade too far out of the waters of what's relevant, your new content then starts to get repetitive. This is something I know definitely happened to me where, you know, I was writing content for marketers at my day job, and I would write, you know, 10 tips for coming up with blog post ideas. And then a year and a half later, I would have to write another version of that same blog post because I was just on the hamster wheel and I needed a new post and people were asking about that. And instead of calling on my old body of work that I'd already created, I published more stuff. And just after all of this stuff, again, marketers remain exhausted. I know that I'm hammering this home, but that's because I feel like so many of our marketing webinars and education, we are so focused on the best practices and what's best for our companies that we forget about ourselves. But that era is over. Like I said, content shock is something that Mark Schaefer predicted, the changing economics of content. And as you can see now, we're in 2020 where the graph ends, where the amount of content produced is way more than any consumer can consume. And so we've gone from goals like publishing content daily to things like, you know, Buffer was one of the companies that was very known for their prolificness and how often they published, but now we're getting to the point where they stopped publishing new blog posts for 1 month. And where HubSpot, who I know is a lot of our like hashtag marketing inspo and is a reason a lot of us wanted to publish daily, we wanted to be like HubSpot, they removed 3,000 pieces of outdated content from their blog. And so it's time to start dealing with content shock. And my own prescription, instead of more content, is minimalist content marketing. It's like a big old chill pill for your content strategy. And there are 3 rules of minimalist content marketing. The first one is defining what enough content means for your company. And this is where the minimalist phrase comes from. Like I said, I'm not actually a minimalist, but something that I love and I have taken from the minimalist mindset and movement is defining enough. Like when you get started with like the minimalist challenges and stuff like that. I was watching a YouTube vlogger yesterday talking about, she was doing a decluttering challenge and you first have to decide what enough means, you know, like what is, before you start decluttering your closet, what is enough clothes to keep? And so define what enough content means for your company. That way you don't need to just endlessly keep creating forever and ever. You know what enough means. And once you reach that enough, you can focus on rule number 2, using content more than creating it. I know we've all heard things like you should be spending as much time promoting your content as you do creating it and stuff like that. And we don't really talk that much about what that actually means and where that time actually goes. And later in this webinar, you'll get a better picture of that. And finally, you'll want to prioritize remixing and repurposing content from your existing library over recreating new things and recreating the wheel, like I mentioned before. So, how do we actually do this? Step 1 of building a minimalist content strategy, and we're going to go more into depth later. This is an overview right now. First up, you're going to identify your goals and priorities. Next, you are going to complete a goal-oriented content audit. Next, you're going to look for your remixing and repurposing opportunities. Then you're going to identify your content gaps. And then finally, create your content marketing calendar. And I really want to point out that, most of the time building a content strategy, people tend to start with the marketing calendar. We don't do that till the end. And now, in the words of En Vogue, and now it's time for a breakdown. I'm going to go down and break down each step individually. So first, identifying your goals and priorities. Super important to be mapping your content to the rest of your business goals, always. Don't just create content to create content. Having strategic content that maps to specific business initiatives and KPIs and stuff like that is so much more important than being able to say you published 3 times last week. And so think about things like long-term goals or short-term projects and what important dates you have in your company calendar coming up. Think about, both sales campaigns or new customer support features and product features. Think about what else is going on in the rest of your business instead of just keeping this content calendar siloed away from everything else. And consider both marketing content and, straight up marketing goals along with collaborations with other departments. When I worked at Mention, something that we did that was really great was having an initiative where once a month our blog was dedicated to repurposing customer service content from things like our knowledge base and support stuff into more user-friendly, search-friendly content. That was amazing. And that was totally outside of, considerable marketing goals, but it helped the support team with their goals. And then once you've identified your goals for the month or the quarter or whatever you're dealing with, you're going to complete a goal-oriented content audit. And I know traditional content audits are big and overwhelming, and whatever app you use, Screaming Frog or whatever, it takes forever to go through your whole website. I'm not a fan of doing those more than necessary. Again, I like to say I am strategically lazy. And so in addition to doing those big audits that just pull as much data as possible once or twice a year, I like to frequently do these smaller goal-oriented content audits. And it's just kind of more focused on the one goal you have. So for example, if your goal for next quarter is to nurture leads and you're not so much focused on traffic or generating leads, but you're very focused on your conversion rates, you would then go and look at the data from your big content audit and look at whatever stats are most important to you and your nurturing, and pick out pieces of content that could be helpful to that. So I like to put things into 3 categories during this content audit. I like to pick out potentially useful content and identify them as either a greatest hit, which is, your best content, kind of self-explanatory, your hidden gems, which are things that were a great idea, but they didn't do the job at the time. So whether it was implementation, timing, whatever, it was a good idea that you'd like to take another stab at. And then remix candidates. And those are just kind of meh content that just kind of needs a little boost. They don't need big overhauls, but let's say you're not promoting them as frequently as you could be. And so that way you have a way of working all of your past content that's relevant to your current marketing goals into the calendar for your current campaign. And so again, step 3, you've identified those 3 categories of content. You're now going to pool them all together, and you're going to identify what things might need to be updated, what old blog posts need to be updated with, say, current screenshots from your website or more updated calls to action. You're going to optimize it maybe for different SEO information or a different target keyword. And you're going to repurpose it from your blog post into something like a lead magnet or an email or social media series. And that what you do there will depend on your current goals and audits. And as a baseline, your greatest hits are going to be things that you repurpose as much as possible. Do whatever you can with them. Really squeeze them for everything that they're worth. The hidden gems, these older ones that are full of potential, you want to update and optimize them so that that potential can come to the surface. And the remix candidates are things that you can just focus on reformatting. So maybe it was a blog post, but you never emailed it out to your email list. So now you can do that. Or maybe you can turn it into a Facebook Live or some kind of video. And so you're going to work on reformatting that and trying to see whether or not it is a greatest hit and worth milking even more. Step 4 is to identify any current gaps. So you look at your existing content that you've pulled from the past, and you look at your current goals. So let's go again with the nurturing goals. So you're going to say, all right, we need to nurture leads. Here are the questions that those leads are going to have, and we need to answer in order to do that. Here is the content that we have to serve that. But what else? What do we have? What do we not have content for? And really, that's the only content that you need to create from scratch next month or next whatever. You don't need to write a new blog post twice a week, every week, just to say that you showed up if your current marketing goals are nurturing your existing audience. And yeah, you don't need to focus on things that aren't relevant to your current goals. And so after you've identified those gaps, you finally have all the information that you need to create your content marketing calendar. And you're going to create a calendar or a schedule that balances and alternates between creating new content to fill those gaps, balancing that with optimizing and repurposing what you already have. And so you can organize those pieces into goal-focused campaigns, promotions, whatever you need to. And this way you do treat creating content and what I like to call remixing content, but what's essentially just different ways of promoting your content with equal weight. And so that where that 50-50 rule comes in is you spend a certain amount of time promoting a piece of content as soon as it goes live, but then you should also be coming back to it later for opportunities like these. Whenever you have a business goal that's relevant to it and that it can help with, you should be going back and re-promoting it, re-updating it, republishing it, things like that. And so when I look at that 50-50 rule, if the company total, including writing, design, whatever, if the company spent 10 hours creating a piece of content, that, the way I look at it, means over the next year, maybe they need to spend 10 hours promoting that piece of content or repurposing that piece of content or optimizing it. It doesn't need to happen all at once, though. You should be going back in 3 months and 6 months and 9 months, etc. So now let's get some remixing inspiration from the industry that does it best. This is the entertainment industry. This is pop culture. This is where my niche interests become relevant, because the whole entertainment industry, music, movies, TV, whatever, they're all masters at repurposing content, because in their industry, the content is the product, or in some cases, the audience watching it, like TV for selling ads. But so their content is the product. And so in their industry, getting content in front of new audiences has a more direct ROI than it does in a lot of our own industries. And so they focus on it a lot more. They can see results quickly and go with what's working. And so I find them to be a really great inspiration to look at. So first of all, creating remixes. Let's talk about finesse. Does anyone else absolutely love this remix and video? And what I love, even more than the song, even more than the video, even more than Cardi B's jacket and t-shirt, is the fact that this was a song from a 1.5-year old album that was minimally promoted at the time. It wasn't released as a single. But Bruno Mars took it 1.5 years later. He added Cardi B, who was at the time, that was like at the very beginning of the huge year of Cardi B. So the timing on this was just perfect. And this remix became a chart topper, a record setter in terms of its chart performance, setting, historical records. And it was actually a tour starter. Bruno and Cardi ended up doing an entire tour based on the success of this song. And what's really notable about that in terms of speaking to its success is that in the current music industry, where streaming and YouTube and stuff like that makes it harder for artists to profit off of listening to music, tours are what really is like the moneymaker for the artist these days. And so the fact that they were able to launch a tour, the most profitable thing for an artist right now, based on this piece of repurposed content, gold. It's just gold. And so how marketers can apply this is by taking old content that might be kind of hidden or buried away and resurfacing it, capitalizing on current trends. So for example, Ahrefs has had an amazing blog for years, and they still publish blog posts frequently. But last year, or maybe it was the year before, but much more recently, they started a YouTube channel. And one of the things that they are doing on their YouTube channel is creating these tutorials based on old blog posts. And you can see this one in particular, just this one, got 27,000 views at the time of this screenshot. And especially for a software tool like this company in particular, YouTube traffic is going to be very highly qualified for them. And so again, gold. Another great example is creating sequels and spin-offs. And I like to call this discussion the difference between being a Frasier and a Joey. Because from what I understand, on Cheers, Frasier wasn't that popular of a character. And some of the fans were even like mad when they gave him the spin-off instead of other people. But then you ended up having a spin-off that became so popular, is so funny, is such an archetype for a great sitcom, a quirky family and Eddie. And it lasted 11 years based on a character that wasn't even that popular in the source material. However, then you have someone like Joey from Friends, who was very popular as a character on Friends. And I don't like talking about Joey, the spinoff. As a Friends fan, I just don't like doing it. It's a dark time in my life. I watched every episode because I felt obligated, but it wasn't good. And so strategic spinoffs is very important. And so how marketers can do this, a few options. In this example, we are looking at emails, because when it comes to repurposing content in particular, a lot of people immediately think of things like social media and repurposing to video or Facebook posts or something like that. And repurposing has gotten kind of a reputation as a top of funnel activity. But that's just because that's how people are using it. You can very, very easily use repurposing towards the middle and the bottom of the funnel too. And a great example of this is repurposing blog posts into emails. And so two examples here are Drip Scripts is a website that has free marketing tools and cheat sheets. And each kind of toolkit, I think they call them, contains a checklist of action items along with an example. And you can see that they summed up the whole case study into a few different action items and a quick summary of the email. And it just sends people into Drip Scripts. And so this is a great way to nurture their existing subscribers without creating tons of new content, by pulling on the tools and resources they've already created. And then over on this side, we have InVision's newsletter, and they have a very well-known newsletter for good reason. I'm not even a designer, and it's for designers, and I get it, because they're great at actually coming up with a newsletter that appears to convert and really seems intentional in how it nurtures and moves their subscribers through InDesign's customer journey, instead of just being a quick bullet list of industry news or a short bullet list of what they published in the last week. Each week has a theme. It pulls different content based around that theme, both new and old content, and they really put thought into adding context and figuring out how everything fits together. So that's a great example of curation as well. And then finally, syndication. And this is where Friends went right, because you had the must-see TV show of the 90s. Actually, my laptop is currently sitting on a book about Friends. And it became the must-see TV show of the 90s. You added Nick at Night, TBS, streaming platforms. What do? You get that Friends money. You also get very obsessed fans. That is me at the Friends pop-up in New York City last year. And just the pure joy on my face. And something really interesting about when I was there is that I was expecting to be one of the younger people at the pop-up, because I was, when Friends was on, one of the younger members of the audience. Like, I was watching it with my parents. And I expected to be one of the younger people there, but there were so many teenagers and people just of all ages, because I realized later that Friends is still on like every day. And then it's also on Netflix, or it might have recently been taken off, I think, but I have the DVDs, so I don't know. And it's the way that it has been syndicated. It is just this 20-year-old content that is still constantly being discovered by new teenagers everywhere. And, like, I relate so much to the 14 and 15-year-olds that just watched it for the first time. And so many of the jokes go over their head, but it's still hilarious. And yeah. And so how marketers can do this syndication is by looking at where you can syndicate your blog posts that you publish on your own properties. An example that I love of this is Buffer. When they were first getting started, they were known for their prolificness before they started to ease off creating new content. But even back then, they were not publishing as much new content as it seemed, because even though their marketing team was publishing daily on their blog, along with once a week on entrepreneur.com and stuff like that, you can see the stuff that was being published on entrepreneur.com was being repurposed from Buffer. And so they were prolific, they were publishing a lot, but then they were also syndicating it as they went. And so every piece that they published actually appeared to us, their audience, as like 3 or 4 or 5 different pieces of content. Oh, one more I forgot about. Finally, and this, what I'm doing right now, is a great example of how performances and tours can be great for growing your audience. So you take content that works, like the Spice Girls songs in the 90s. You take trusted partners, like I think they were with Virgin Records in the US, and you get publicity tours that take the world by storm. Something that I did not notice during their rise in the US was how quickly the Spice Girls went from someone people here had never heard of to people every little girl like me was trying to dress like, and wear huge platform sneakers and give peace signs all over. And yeah, they rose quickly. And part of that was that they were touring heavily. And they, between opening for other people and their own tours, they were able to get in front of tons of US audiences really quickly. And that had to do with how they became so famous so quickly here in an age that did not have social media or YouTube. And so examples of that are webinars like the one I am doing right now. So meta. And another example of this is when I worked at Mention. We did a webinar with Sujan Patel, and it was a great webinar. It was one that he went on to do with a lot of other companies. And each time he did the webinar, I noticed the examples were slightly different depending on what industry he was talking to. And so that's a really great way of going on tour and then still catering to your audience while repurposing content. And another example from this example is that in order to make our webinar with him stand out when he was doing the webinar with other people, we also repurposed this into an email course and a series of blog posts. So that goes to even more examples. With any given piece of content, you don't have to follow just one of these methods. You can and should apply as many as possible. And then I don't know why I said the last. I have so many. Yeah, I believe this is the last though. Another example that we have is content updates. And these are the hidden gems that I mentioned before, content that missed the mark the first time around. An example of content that missed the mark the first time around is Arrested Development Season 4. That was one of the first original sitcoms that Netflix originally produced, and they hadn't really figured out what they wanted to do yet. And so what they originally did was something very different, where the episodes were not in chronological order. It was very confusing, and a lot of fans were very confused. And so when Arrested Development got renewed for season 5, they completely remixed and re-edited and re-released season 4. You can see in this screenshot, season 4 remix. And they replaced the original season on Netflix with that, because they knew that in order to get people to come back for season 5, they would need to retell season 4 in a way that made sense. They needed to give it another chance. And that worked. When I watched the remix, I realized I did not understand season 4 at all. It was a swing and a miss. I respect the effort that they took, but it did not work, and I am grateful that they fixed their mistake and re-released the content. And this is something that I do regularly. So for example, this is one of the posts on my blog, and you can see in the yellow portion, it was originally published in November 2016. And this is something that has become one of my most important pieces of content. So I make sure, and I go back and I update that thing once a year. You can see actually it's been about over a year now. You can see February 2018, so I am overdue. But yeah, going back and re-updating content. Some of the things that I do when I update an old blog post is I look at what like SEO keywords it's optimized around, and then I compare that to what SEO keywords it's actually ranking for, because sometimes they're not the same thing. And if they're already ranking for these keywords over here without being optimized for it, if I can just then optimize for what's already working, results will get so much better. And so it's just a way to go back, and even if something isn't a huge miss, it's a way to make something even better than it already is. And so that was everything that I had for you today, all of the examples. If you want to connect with me further, you can get Minimalist with your new favorite maximalist. My website is brittanyberger.com, and I am on Twitter and Instagram at thatbberg. And that is all that I had for the presentation. I'm going to stop my share, and we can go take a look at the Q&A questions that came in.
Happy days. Thanks so much, Brittany. That was amazing. I learned a ton. It took an absolute ton of notes.
Awesome.
But what I've got circled most, poor Joey. It wasn't that bad, surely, was it? The Joey show?
Compared to Friends, if you like compare it to...
Well,
yeah, it was not what we were expecting.
I think I maybe watched the first one. It was pretty bad. It was bad.
Yeah.
Let me see. All right, so we had a couple of questions come in during the session. So folks, we're going to stick around for another sort of 10, 15 minutes. So if you have any questions about anything that Brittany covered, just drop your questions in the chat. In the meantime, we'll go back and look at a couple of the questions that came in already. So the first one came in from Tia. Tia says that the slides are great. Is there any chance you could share the slides after the webinar?
Yeah, definitely. I'll email them over to you. So that
okay, cool. And then I'll include the slides then when I'm sending a link to the replay tomorrow.
Sounds good.
The other question that came in was from Ali, and this is a really good question. So Ali says, does this approach apply to new blogs starting up? I heard it's an exception because as new blogs, you need to be churning out lots of content. So what do you think?
I think that you need to be showing up consistently, but I don't think that you should be churning out content at the beginning, because that's how you get burnt out. And so if you can just avoid that from the start, even better. So my approach for newer businesses or companies that are newer to getting started with content marketing is to take this minimalist approach and publish less, and just go all the more harder with promotion and repurposing, so that you don't get to the point where you have all of this stale content and content that's never been repurposed. So you can just set out with this mindset from the start. I wish I were in your position.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would focus less on getting out in front of your audience with new content and focus just on getting out in front of your audience with content, period. And so that will be a mix. And you will be creating more content at the beginning of your journey than a few years in, but I still am very against the mindset of churning out as much as possible at any point at this point.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Like I've mentioned this in pretty much every webinar we've ever done. I'm not from a marketing background. So when we launched Beacon, like I was figuring all this stuff out, and I was reading like all the best practice articles that were like, you know, blog content weekly, twice weekly. If you look at our blog now, like there's a lot of content in there, and like hand on heart, honestly, it's not great content. I mean, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But like, if I'm going through what you were saying, like, was that content mapped to our business goals? It wasn't. We were creating content for the sake of creating content. So now our blog is pretty full. What we did actually towards the end of last year is we took a completely different approach. Like we got burnt out from producing the content. Like it's true, it happens. So what we did was that we started then we mapped out our business goals, and we figured out that a lot of our goals were more about like helping our existing customers to be more successful instead of like bringing new customers in the front door. We thought, you know, like if we can't help the people that already trust us, you know, like we've no business bringing more and more people in. So we spent a lot of time creating like a lot of like video content, like and it was all content that we had been written across like 80 different blog posts. So we just sort of remixed it into like a series of concise 6 or 7 videos, and they've been performing really well for us. And you know what, it's
Love
great
it.
to have like one place to send new customers. Just say like everything you need is here on this YouTube channel, and like people they go and binge that content. So yeah, I'm
Yeah, it's
all
just
in.
such an easier approach to the user too. It really is just win-win for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, we've got another question in here from Angela. So Angela has been blogging consistently for 2 years, and she's disappointed at how little SEO visibility she gets. So she wants a more strategic approach. Is that something you can help with?
Yeah, if you go to my website and get on my email list, I sometimes open spots in my schedule for audits, and that is something that I could help with.
Yeah.
In general, I would say this is a great opportunity for remixing because you've had the content created, and if it is like mapped to your business goal, you know, maybe the problem is the way the content is optimized, and so you could update it to do that. It might be your website authority, in which case repurposing content with syndication or publicity could help you get some backlinks. And so, I mean, really, pop culture reference again, but like remixing is kind of like, if you've seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's like the Windex. It's just, people weren't totally off base when they treated content as the solution to any problem in a business, but that just doesn't always mean that you need to create new content for that. And so, yeah, if we figure out what the problem is with your SEO visibility now, it should be pretty easy to use the content that you've created to kind of plug those holes.
Yeah, like if you've got content there already, like I mean, that's a big part of the challenge. Like if you've been, you know, creating content consistently, like hopefully, like it is just a matter of fine tuning, like maybe like how that content is even structured behind the scenes, or as you said, Brittany, getting more backlinks or things like that. I just wanted to go back. Oh, let me see. I've got another. Okay, so we've got another question come in here, and this is from RG. So RG is looking for a solid keyword tool to help with SEO. So they're an attorney who writes non-legal content, but they need to sprinkle in some keywords to be found. You mentioned Ahrefs. Is the tool to revisit keywords the same to freshen the content?
Yeah, Ahrefs is a very robust tool, so I love that one. It's got I mean, it's not free, it is a paid tool, but it is the best paid tool that I've personally used. They've got so much for you there. And then in terms of like, if you ever want to do basic keyword research, you can use, there are lots of free Chrome plugins that usually you get a certain number of searches free per month. And so if you just, plan carefully, you can use the free like tier of that, or something like Uber suggests. But I really do like, oh yeah, I'll place the name in the chat. I know that it's, there you go. Ahrefs. So like the HTML of a link. It's punny, but hard to say.
I'm sure they're kicking themselves all these years later. Like, it obviously hasn't hampered the business, but like whenever they have to spell it out, I bet you it's like, no, because like email links, and it's like the HTML, and like we do HTML.
Yeah, and I've also, that's a word that I've never known how to say out loud, where it's like I've known, and I said it right today, but normally I naturally say hrefs. Yes. And I feel like Stewie from Family Guy with the cool clip. And I always say it like that, and I know it's not right, but I normally don't catch myself in advance unless I know I'm being recorded.
Yeah, I'm just picturing you like hanging out with like all the SEO, like HTML guys. And you're like, yeah, hrefs, right?
Yeah, I use hrefs to research my cool clip.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm just looking through my notes here, and like one thing that really stood out for me, like when you were saying about content shock, was like HubSpot killed like 3,000 pieces of outdated content. Like, how many hours were spent writing that content to then, like, fair enough, like they realized like it was a mistake, or like it's not where their business is at now, but to kill 3,000 pieces, that must have, as a big decision, like.
But then when you think about it, that was probably only like 1% of their total content.
Yeah, they are prolific.
Yeah, but it's definitely a sunk cost thing. And I get the reason that people are so hesitant to do it, but there definitely gets to a point where the old content is not just not helping you, but it's holding you back. Like you mentioned old content on the blog before. And when I first started at Mention, one of their most popular blog posts was about tools for web designers. Because it was the kind of thing where, it was just transparency, sharing their tools. And it was something that we did a lot. And in terms of PR, worked really well. But just for some reason, that one post took off way more than any of the other company culture type posts. And it was so annoying because it was bringing in amazing search traffic, or like lots of search traffic, but they were all horrible customer fits. And so it was actually bringing us bad customers. And so we eventually ended up revising that and repositioning it.
And that's what you did. So you mixed the content up instead of just like deleting the post, like you massaged it to sort of help you.
Because in that case, the reason that we shared like startup kind of inside the startup content like that was more for recruiting. So we actually just like un-SEO'd that post. We just made it so that it was like not well optimized for any keyword, and it was more focused on something that we could send to people that were looking to apply to work with the company. And so it was still a recruiting resource, but we just kind of made it worse for SEO. Another thing we could have done would have been like to put it behind a gated thing or something like that. Like we could have turned it into a PDF or something.
And
it was bringing us organic traffic that was bad customers. And so.
But that's what I was going to say, like, because organic traffic, like everyone wants it, and you have all this traffic coming in, like fair enough, like you were able to say like it's bad traffic. But when you were working in-house, did you find there was maybe a little bit of a conflict when you were saying like, I think we should be publishing less? Like, was there a bit of pushback within the organization saying, no, like we need to keep churning it out?
I think that because I didn't frame it so much as we're going to publish less. I would go to people and I would say like, hey, I had this idea to create a blog series based on knowledge-based posts or something like that. I would get them to fall in love with the idea and then say, all right, well, in order to make room for that on the content calendar, here's what needs to happen. So it was a little managing up where, Yeah, I learned that from my manager at my previous job,
That is
where she
tricky.
was always very good about she kind of I've had one manager who sensed my like workaholism, and so she would always make sure that I wasn't kind of like planning too much. And yeah, that kind of taught me to say like, when I want to add something new, sometimes like, you know, adding something new to my plate sometimes requires taking something off. And Mention was very much in that same mindset. And, you know, so it was good, where if they were convinced an idea was a good idea, they would be fine um, pulling the pedal off of something else for a little
Yeah,
while in exchange.
yeah, makes sense. Just say we've got a couple more questions have come in. Steve wants to know if you can give another example of a marketing sequel or spin-off.
Sure thing. So something that I do is I have a YouTube channel where I publish more. This is for a different business. I publish tech tips because YouTube is a place that is really popular for like going searching for tutorials. However, that is only the tech portion is only a very small part of what the business is. And so for each video, there is a blog post that touches on the same topic, but from a more mindset approach. So as background information, the kind of hook of the business is, you know, helping people balance productivity and self-care and mindset. And so one topic might be automation, and on YouTube would be the actual automation tutorials for how to get set up and stuff like that. But then on the blog, I would talk about, you know, the mindset behind automation and stuff that's better, you know, written out and that's more essay type. And the two of those would come together. And, you know, they would kind of spin off of each other. I would usually start with the blog post and then spin off of the video and embed the video in the blog post.
Yes, that makes sense. And I suppose it speaks to each format as well. Like people like instructional content on YouTube, and then I guess the blog is better for like SEO, that organic traffic. So yeah, they both work off each other. It's really
Yeah.
smart. All right. Patricia has also asked, how do you balance the organic content creation with paid ad content creation?
This is an interesting question because in my day jobs and in my freelance work, I don't really deal that much with the paid side. But something that I know that we have done in my day jobs is that we use the organic content as, you know, things for our paid ads. So for example, we were doing a lot of Facebook advertising when I was there, and we would use some of our blog posts as, you know, as the post for the Facebook. You know, like it would be like a promoted post promoting or like talking about the blog post, and then that would get them in. And then once, you know, they clicked on it, you know, it would, you know, different stages of the funnel, but we would pull out different pieces of organic content that would be relevant to each campaign. And so this is another really great opportunity. You can either use the content and actually promote it for top of funnel ads, or, you know, let's say you have a blog post that's more middle of funnel, you can take the actual copy from that and target members of your audience in a more like long form social post or something like that.
Cool. Makes sense. Yeah, it's always, we haven't run a lot of Facebook ads, but when you're going in, you're setting them up and you have to write the ad copy. I always hit a block there. Like I'm terrible at that, like really short, snappy content. But it's great if it is to something like a blog post and you can just pull wee snippets out and put them in the actual ad copy. It's a time saver.
Yeah, and especially if you're just getting started with ads too, or just testing it, or if you don't have a lot of faith in your ad copy skills, that's great because you can pull from your best blog post and you say, well, okay, I know that people have liked this sentence before.
Yes,
And so just from the confidence standpoint, it's helpful too.
for sure. Definitely. Trying to think. It doesn't look like there's too many more questions coming in. Does anyone else have any questions, or should we wrap up? I don't know. We'll give you another couple of minutes, just if you want to drop any questions in the chat. Feel free. This is your chance. Brittany's here live, ready to answer your questions. Yeah, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, just the best webinars are the ones you come away going, I need to do that tomorrow. Like this, I can't put this off any longer. So I've got a bunch of ideas here for things I want to do tomorrow.
Awesome. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, it doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in. Um, yeah, so Brittany, thank you so much for your time. That was absolutely awesome. Judging by the comments in the chat and the questions, I think everybody loved it. So just to remind you, we'll be sending out a link to the replay tomorrow, and I'll also include a copy of Brittany's slides as well. So thanks everyone so much for joining us, and thank you, Brittany, too.
Thank you.